Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar which is part of AMEC's Measurement Month. My name is Andy West and I'm the Chief Development Officer here at Hotwire. I'm also a Director of AMEC and I'm in my second two-year term in office with that organisation. So it's my great pleasure today to host this virtual fireside chat on the subject of measuring the impact of media relations. Now, before I introduce our guests, let me quickly set the scene. Over the course of the last 30 years or so that I've been in agency, I have consistently heard the view that you cannot measure PR. Indeed, there are still people out there who dismiss measurement as a distraction and who rely on getting the job done as the means to evaluate whether they've delivered against a budget or on a campaign. And I believe this is true both agency side and client side. So however, in the past 10 years, we've seen a major shift in the attitude toward measurement and evaluation. And as you would expect, I give great credit to AMEC for this, having tirelessly lobbied the industry, the trade associations and the trade media to better understand that PR can and must be measured. Initiatives such as the Barcelona Principles, the Integrated Evaluation Framework, the Measurement Maturity Mapper, and most recently the Common Ground Programme have all contributed to much improved measurement discipline and also critically best practice sharing on a global scale. But it goes deeper than that. Not only has technology helped us to track results, but PR professionals on both sides of the fence have, I think, woken up to the fact that firstly, we need to justify and quantify the impact we're having on an organization's business. And secondly, that without good measurement discipline, our budgets and very existence can be threatened. It's no longer enough to simply point to a bit of content or a piece of coverage and say, there you go, didn't we do well? No, today we have to show what your audience takes out of the communication, what the longer term effects of that understanding are, and what the end impact it has on the organization or the client. Now, AMEC has produced a masterclass series, which if you are an AMEC member, you can binge watch via the website that explores this concept in great detail. And as one of the presenters of episode 4, when we looked at 3 O's and an I can thoroughly recommend it. And even if you're not yet a member of AMEC, which I hope after this webinar you will rush to the website and sign up for, check out the webpage at amecorg.com this month, because there are many, many events being hosted all over the world as part of Measurement Month. So this brings me to the theme of today's chat, measuring the impact of media relations. We know from the many conversations we have with clients, with peers, and with the industry in general, that proving impact from earned media is tricky. We can count clips, we can analyze the coverage for message penetration, we can look for keywords, we can look at prominence, sentiment, tonality. All these are great, but perhaps they're just really a measure of how well the media has reacted to our communications rather than the end audience. So how do we measure outcomes and impacts? How do we show that all that coverage is having a measurable effect on the reputation of our business, on the sales, on revenue, on talent attraction, on share price? So that's the crux of what we're going to discuss in the next hour in this fireside chat. So without further ado, let me please bring in our two guests and ask them to introduce themselves and to spend a few minutes kicking things off with their views on this knotty topic. So let me introduce to start with Lucy Linthwaite from IBM.
Hello everyone, and thank you for turning up in vast numbers for the chat today. So I lead external relations for IBM in the UK. So my main focus is enhancing and protecting IBM's reputation in the UK press. But as with all things kind of communications based these days, our remit is very broad, and in a lot of our campaigns we roll out, we have to look at social media and influencer activity as well. So when I look at measurement, it's how do we kind of pull all that together and manage all that, and measure all those different aspects. So I've been working in communications for about 20 years, both in-house and at agency. So in that time, I've really seen how the kind of topic and the focus on measurement grow. And I firmly believe it's one of the things that we should all be focused on at the moment. So my opinion on kind of measuring for impact, as I said, it's something I do feel quite strongly about, and as ever, and I think we all believe, it should be linked back to your objectives, and we should be looking at how our activity and our work is having a positive impact on the business. But I also think we need to look at being able to prove that what we're doing actually is making a difference, and it's either, as Andy pointed out, it's either changing a narrative, it's increased a positive sentiment, or it's brought in new business leads. But I also believe it's not just what you measure, but it's how you do it, why you do it, and how you actually use those results. So in my eyes, measurement isn't just there to justify the success of a campaign. It should also be there to be used as a guide for the team to use when actually driving a campaign. And this way, the measurements move from being lots of nice numbers and graphs on a page to actually being real actionable insights that can help and support a team.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. And over to Stella Bales.
Hello. So I am the director of a couple of tools. First one is a reporting tool called Coverage Book, and the other one is an insight tool called Answer the Public. Before I went into software, I was very much in PR agency side. So for around 8 years in traditional PR agencies, I guess you would say. And then I moved to a digital marketing agency where I started to put SEO and PR together. And the reason for that is because when I started to learn about SEO, it was enlightening for me, to be honest, because it felt like that was the first time I was able to prove the impact of public relations in all of the years that I'd worked in PR, through looking at the impact of SEO and how PR fits into that. So I worked in an agency doing that for a very long time, about another 8 years, I think. Then wrote a book about it, and then started to work in some software that brings in some of those elements, which it might come up today. But yeah, there's some elements of metrics from SEO PR in Coverage Book, and Answer the Public is looking at search insights. So that is very much my passion and background, and that has all stemmed from really looking for a way of finding better ways of measuring the PR that I was doing back then. So yeah, so that's my passion. In fact, I worked with AMEC in North America with Nicole Morio quite closely a couple of years ago when I was based in New York, and that was through the tools that I was working on. But did get involved actually with Jesper, who's just said hi, on a couple of events there where I did sort of talk about this sort of merge of search and PR in order to measure impact. So yeah, so that's a big passion of mine. But something that I guess, and that's where my knowledge lies, but I guess with that area, it's very data driven. It's great if you need to be able to prove traffic going to a site or sales, if it's a consumer side, that kind of thing. But something that's interesting me at the moment, and I think we may well talk about it, is whether we're working in consumer or B2B, a lot of change has happened in the world. We've just mentioned there's something huge going on in America right now. And we are all living in a pandemic at the moment. And all of these crazy things that are happening this year has changed the way, and constantly changes the way that we are all feeling. So whether we are communicating to consumers or just people, whether those people are in businesses or they're buying products, public feeling is constantly changing, and as communicators, we are hopefully affecting that in the right way. But how we measure that and then go on to measure that the trust and reputation that comes from that is such a huge area and interest for me at the moment. And so, yeah, it's a sort of a project that I'm looking at the moment, and how you can actually track that, because it's not as simple as just looking at metrics for sales or metrics for downloads. They're all great, but how do we actually measure this sort of public feeling and change? And so that's something that I'm quite passionate about at the moment too.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stella. And we'll try and unpack some of that through the course of the next sort of 30, 40 minutes or so. So before we dive into some questions, just a couple of little housekeeping points. First of all, there is a Q&A function in the webinar, and if you would like to pose any questions, I will keep a close eye on that. If you could use the Q&A, that would be brilliant, because everyone can then, I think, see the Q&A. We will make the video available after the event as well. I think it'll be on the AMEC. I'm sure AMEC will host it on their website, and we'll also host it on the Hotwire website. To kick things off, what I'd like to do is launch a poll, which I hope will provide even more talking points. Hopefully everybody can see this poll. It's come up on my screen. Do please vote. I think we have 54 people in the webinar. I can see, yep, I can see people are starting to vote, which is great. So as we look at that, it's interesting. Outputs are taking a healthy early lead so far. We've got 26, 28 people so far. Give it another 20 or so seconds. Elaine says she can't see the poll. Sorry, Elaine. Not sure why that is. The questions, though, just for everybody, if anybody cannot see it, the question is, when considering your approach to measurement and evaluation of communication activity, which best describes the type of metrics you focus on? Is it outputs, i.e. media coverage or reach? Is it outcomes, which is things like reputation or advocacy? Or is it business impact, i.e. sales, revenue, perhaps it's membership growth, donations, for example? It looks like most people have voted. We've got 77% response, which I think most polling organizations would be quite happy with. So I'll end the poll, and hopefully that will provide some answers. So by far and away, and to my fellow panelists, I don't know whether you can see this. If not, I will recite the results. So by a long way, 58% of you say that you currently, the approach to measurement is through media coverage and reach. 23%, which I think is encouraging, is around business impact, sales, membership growth, donations. I'm guessing probably sales, depending on where you come from, and then only 19% in outcomes analysis. So interestingly, what that suggests is the majority of us are still measuring outputs. So maybe I could ask Lucy to comment on that. Does that chime with what you're finding at IBM at the moment?
It's interesting that the middle one, almost like there's a jump from the kind of the beginning, outputs to business. I thought they'd be more in the middle. It's similar-ish to what we have at. Oh, hang on, it's just popping up.
There we go. I've worked out the technology, and I can share it.
It's similar-ish to what we do at IBM, but I think two things we need to kind of map out is that we have kind of two forms of measurement. So you have your one set of measurements, which is kind of like, I never know exactly how to call them, like your continuous measurements that would, just you set them and they run. And then you have kind of separate campaign measurements, because ultimately some of those campaigns will have slightly different objectives. So you have our sort of ones that run all the time are actually kind of similar to the kind of the first one, which is around share of voice. That is one of the measures. But again, I know people have kind of a mixed view of share of voice, but actually kind of comes back to what I was saying before. It's actually how you use it and what you do with those results. So where I'm a bit anti share of voice is if you do a campaign and you have this lovely big figure at the end, but it's a big sort of vanity figure that you have that means absolutely nothing. But actually, the way we use it as kind of one of those continuous measurements is actually we look at trends and fluctuations in that share of voice. So that gives us a kind of an additional layer of insight. So it's less actually about look at these amazing figures. It's actually we can track what coverage kind of that week or that day has caused spikes, what and where has it caused those spikes, where is it hitting the most. So it's actually, again, it's how we're using it. It's not just that particular figure.
Yeah.
But then so we have that running, but also from a campaign perspective and locally in the UK, we have a whole range of measures that we look at, down to looking, we incorporate social listening into that from a social, and just about getting those big vanity figures, but actually how we're entering and taking part in conversations that we hadn't been before. We look at Google Trends, for example. But also we work very closely with the business to see actually if we have, if any business leads have come in off some of the activities that we've worked on. And with our HR team, for example, on some of the projects we work with them, actually if we've seen an uptick in registrations, for our apprentice scheme, for example. So a real range of stuff, but it really is kind of, again, we have those continuous ones, but then different other measures dependent on what the objective of certain campaigns are.
Interesting. So Stella, from your perspective, I think looking at it perhaps almost more from a more academic perspective, from the sound of it, this is something that you're looking into quite closely. How would you define impact? Because I think we get hung up, on, we've got it in the poll, business impact. But, to Lucy's point, sometimes, the function of and we're only focusing today really on earned media. That's obviously the title of the webinar. But, how would you define impact, and how important is it as part of an overall campaign?
God, it really can. It depends on what the objective is. I know it's always the classic line that we always hear when we're talking about measurement, but it so does. And it's something that I know that when I was working on media relations and earned media, and that was the goal all of the time with my team, it was quite common that we would be working so hard that we would, well, there's two things I want to say. That it's really important to keep metrics consistent when we're trying to measure earned media and the impact of earned media. So that's really important. However, the flip side of that is to always just constantly ask yourself, and if you're responsible for a team and setting KPIs and setting the metrics, to ask, so what? Regularly, to make sure that you're not just using the same metrics for the sake of using the same metrics because you always have done. And that for me was even a point of thinking about media relations. It's just always the way that we did things, like setting out the media list at target media. Is this, this is the right way, and then we're going to do the campaign, and then we're going to measure it, and then we would jump to some kind of outcomes afterwards until I think it was when I left as I say, traditional PR agency, and then went to a marketing, a digital marketing agency, where I really, really, truly did stop thinking so much about media, and then went to the end user, the target audience, the true target audience, and really considered where they would be to properly receive the message that we were trying to deliver to them. And then ask ourselves, is media, is journalists and news the best way to get that message across to them? Is it a better way of earning the trust of other types of influencers? And I think you can it's so easy to get on that runaway train and all the way down, into the media relations part and getting the coverage and then celebrating that coverage. And it's great when you get that coverage, but you have to just go, why are we doing this? Has that message really, really reached the people that we need to be speaking to? So yeah, it's I think yeah, yes, best point about this is just constantly ask yourself, so what? So what with the when you're putting together a media plan, a strategy, the KPIs, the metrics, and then again when you are pulling together your measurement and looking into things and looking at the kind of metrics that you're using, you know, because then you can truly see what an impact would be. But yeah, I do think that asking that question does really help truly answer whether you're going to get that impact or not.
Yeah, I agree. And Lucy, from within IBM, I think, you know, I'm interested to know your stakeholders. Who are you reporting up to or horizontally across? And do they ask the question, so what?
We have a range of people that you know, that we report news, you know, results and progress as well, you know, into. Obviously, we have our senior leadership team in the UK, and we keep them updated on, you know, on progress, because I think that's another thing as well. When we talk about measurements, it always seems to imply the end of a project. And that actually measurements are there to justify the success of the team and budget spend. But actually it's so much, I know, I do believe it's so much more than that. And that's one of the things that we focus on quite a lot, that actually it's those actionable insights, coming back to what I said at the beginning, that keep a campaign ticking along. Because actually you might get halfway through and need to completely change your tact. But if you don't measure it at certain points, you'll never know that. So you'll completely go off on the wrong direction. So actually you know, it's less of a reporting into the senior team, but actually keeping them updated and keeping them abreast and keeping them updated. You know, again, coming back to Stella's point of the consistency is really important. So looking at those fluctuations, looking at those changes, looking at what's worked well and why. Because again, kind of coming back to the point of like really big empty figures, you know, they want to know why something has worked well. What has it actually, you know, have we changed a narrative? Have we, you know, what has it actually, the activity done? And actually, you know, and who has it reached? Because I think there is, you know, again, a bit of a misunderstanding about why media is used in some forms of measurement. And again, with some of the kind of outputs, it's treating the journalist as the end, you know, as the end user, when actually the journalist and the media is the channel that you use to reach your client. So you really need to be looking at your client. And actually, who have you, has your activity made that client, what's it done? Have they made a comment? Have they created you know, have they made you know, an action? Have they taken, you know, so even like a retweet or something, you know, actually, you know, with certain people, that's really good because you've cut through, you've made the change in their minds. So, you know, it's looking at all those points. So yes, we go up to the senior leadership team in the UK, but also, you know, we're part of we're a UK team, but part of a big American, you know, global organization. So we you know, report up to our European leaders and also then into our US leaders on the comms side as well. But again, it's not about, here's our projects and here's the results and, you know, here you go, please continue to employ us. It's actually, you know, it's looking it's looking at a real different layer, and again about that impact, but not getting hung up on, say, you know, sales and goals. We need to really be closely aligned with our business, of course, but sometimes it's challenging in the B2B space when you think of a company the size of IBM. These deals take a long time to come to fruition, and I don't think any one part can you know, part of our business or the marketing team can sort of link one of these really big deals to work they've done, but we all play a part in this kind of buying, you know, cycle. And actually, have we succeeded in the part that we and the role that we are there to, you know, to play, and moved that client on in the process? So just because you've run a campaign and you haven't generated 10 business leads, that doesn't mean that particular campaign has failed. So actually it's being realistic with your measuring that way as well. And you know, as we all say, linking back, you know, working out exactly what objectives that you have and making sure, you know, you link back to them, but not getting so caught up of impact only being, a physical business deal, because then you run the risk of actually just never doing anything.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And actually, Gavin Haycock, who's has posed a question. Thank you, Gavin. Good to see you on the call. Disclosure: Gavin is a client. Question for consideration: what is the panel's view on the merit and value of media itself as an influencer or impact channel? He cites the example of an exec who said that actually a company deliberately sought to keep out of the media as they were selling their business. And I think, to a certain extent, you're talking to that, Lucy, given the high value of sale that an organization in the B2B world like IBM is involved with. So I guess the question for the two of you, I guess for you, Lucy, it is, do you see that, where have you seen examples of where great media coverage exposure has oiled the wheels of commerce within IBM, where you've managed to shift a narrative, create a market? Have you got any examples of that? And then I'd love to come to Stella to see whether, from your perspective, what is the merit and value of media as an influencer? So two separate questions, if maybe like Lucy.
Yeah, of course, and actually, to the point, I'll talk about a campaign we ran about entering a market, and it was actually a campaign that Emma Bennett on my team ran, and it was with Leatherhead Football Club last year, and we did a whole campaign to expand our reputation within the football market. Right. So, we are the lead technology provider for and partner for Wimbledon. So we're very well known in the, in the tennis area. We do rugby, we work with the RFU, but, we're not at that point, we're so well known in the football market. So actually we needed to kind of come up with an engaging and interactive campaign to help enter us into that market. It was an integrated campaign. So we worked very closely with marketing and with advertising, but media played a really strong part. Mm. We launched with a full kind of panel debate, and and we had a strong media presence there, but actually that was something we had very strict measures there about actually showing the progression of that campaign, because we were entering a new market that or we'd been touched on before, but from a media perspective we really hadn't focused on it. It was going to take a while to build up, so we needed to be able to measure that build up. And then once again, it was what we were really key on was measuring not only, we've reached X amount of people and great, our share of voice is going, and let's look at it from a competitive perspective, where are we positioned versus competitors? But again, what is the reaction? So that's where we kind of used Google Trends and things like that. So we could try and during the the time period that we ran that campaign, we looked at how that kind of impacted Google search. Yeah. And actually, if we've seen any upkick there, we also afterwards, work with our advertising team to run some kind of market research and see actually if there had been a shift in opinion and awareness of our AI products, which is actually what we had been pushing at that time. And we actually did see new business leads come off the back of that. So we had those very, a range of measures. But media did play a very, very important part, because also you can, it's not just about securing the coverage, it's then actually how you're using that coverage as part of to expand it. So, we got the coverage, but we then used that with social, used it with new clients to show them. So it wasn't just, they weren't these sort of standalone pieces that kind of came and went. They actually became integrated into that kind of business, how the business was expanding as well.
Yeah, and I think, that's something we could explore as a whole different topic, is how to use earned media as part of an integrated campaign. I'm sure that there might be questions on that, from the people here. But Stella, from your perspective, going back to Gavin's question, the merit and value of media itself as an influencer impact channel. Now, I know Gavin comes from a strongly B2B organization. Maybe we can look at it from both B2B and also consumer, but has the earned media channel lost any of its luster? Is it still an important influence on business? Obviously we know it is on consumer, but on business. I'm just interested in your views on that.
Yeah. I think it's changed its impact. I think it still has an impact, but it's very different to when I was doing media relations, for example. So I think it was interesting you mentioning the being in and out of the media being very important, especially for B2B. I've worked on, especially when I started to focus on the SEO PR sort of strategy of work. I worked on a couple of projects for big organizations who were going through sales or mergers, and particular stories they needed to not be found on Google searches when people were searching for their brand names, or news was coming up about their financial sort of releases, news releases. So that's just an interesting point, that especially in B2B, like what is coming up in news for different types of searches. If it's a CEO search, the brand name search, it could be particular articles which have come out long before we would be trying to secure news that might be out there. So I think that's sort of something really important to remember. But in terms of media and us trying to place coverage and articles, we have to remember how news has changed. So really, if we get a piece of coverage, and thinking about people who see it as soon as it lands, because as PR people, we celebrate as soon as it lands, and then it's often the campaign or the news announcement is happening at that moment when we are working on that piece. But actually, an article is really only visible for about an hour on a news site, and the way that they update so frequently now, and that is becoming more frequent in the updates and change of news, especially in a time in a year like this year. So our article is very quickly buried in terms of how many people truly see that. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have any kind of impact, but I do think that we need to be realistic about who sees that news piece or that piece of coverage, whoever we're trying to target, on that day or that week, because it's actually very small, the number. It's definitely not the monthly traffic figure that we grab. So I know that we have to use some metrics, but let's be realistic, nowhere near that amount of people saw that mention. Yeah. But still, having said all of this, it doesn't lose its impact, because now the difference of being online and not really not focusing so much about print is that they are evergreen. They're always found. So I think that's a really important thing to remember when we're setting our strategy of a particular campaign or a particular announcement, to think about how that article might be found in the future as well, and not just about the announcement or release that we're doing right now that we're working on, because it will be found in the future whether we want it to be or not. So it's just something to bear in mind. So still has a huge impact, but very different to how it used to be.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when I started out, we were still using telex machines. So it was a long time ago, but and fax machines. But you go into every client's reception and you would be greeted with the clippings book. And the sort of the measure of whether a client was progressive or not was whether or not the clippings book was, how thick it was. Yeah. Particularly if you were going to pitch that client, you got a sense of what you were up against. But more importantly, was it up to date? And that's really where, because everything was in print at that time, it was all about the thud factor of the coverage book, and that was pretty much it in terms of measurement. But as I said in the introduction, technology, thankfully has moved on significantly in the last 30 years, and as you say, we have evergreen content. So Stella, you said in your introduction that you have this deep interest in SEO. One of the questions actually that's come into the Q&A from Rob Ashwell maybe relates to this somewhat, but so how do you correlate spikes in trends, web traffic? Do we as PR professionals, do we need to have more data skills? Do we need to understand correlation, causation, standard deviations, which is starting to get into language that makes me go cold because statistics worry me. Not really, by the way. But do we need to be much more sophisticated at data? And how do you prove that attribution or correlation when you look at either SEO analysis or you look at web traffic analysis? What would you advise?
Yeah. I mean, we are absolutely bombarded with data now, aren't we, in comparison to when I was working in agency to even last year. I mean, the amount of tools, technology and data points that we have access to, and just even the ones that we're aware of, let alone that fear factor of, what about the new technology? What are other people using? And often we hear about new metrics or new technology, especially in measurement month, which is great, but it does sort of give that anxiety of like, should I be doing that too? I would say just do what you can, because I actually wouldn't class myself as analytical, even though I've written a book about SEO and PR, and I talk about measurement and love finding out about analytics, but I definitely don't have an natural analytical brain at all. So I do what I can, and then I have some great friends who are very analytical, and I use them as much as possible. So do what you can. But yeah, there's so, I mean, you mentioned attribution. I was really lucky when I worked in a digital marketing agency to be in amongst very analytical people, teams of data analysts, and even since sort of moving on from that agency, I'm friends with Russell McCarthy, who I've had on the podcast twice, who's an attribution expert. He is amazing, and to his own admission, he doesn't know. He doesn't have the answer on how to totally prove PR's impact, but he does know how to attribute success to all areas of marketing, and he does that for some huge businesses. But even, experts like that at the very, very top scale of attribution, analytical data, and pulling in all of the proof for all different areas of types of marketing, there's always different ways that you can cut things. So nobody will ever have the absolute right answer of, that's it, we've got it. Here's all of the share of how successful all of these areas of marketing is, because you can cut data in all sorts of different ways. So, just remember that when you feel like you might not have all of the answers, the very best of the best still don't have the complete answer. And we find that, I've worked with very analytical people within Coverage Book and Answer the Public, and for our own measurement, we have all sorts of tools and data coming through, and it's incredible the kind of things that we can see. But we have to just focus on like 3 main numbers, because otherwise you can be absolutely drowning in data and not get anywhere with making, as Lucy said, really pulling true insights to then change the way you work. That's why we're doing this, right? It's, otherwise what's the point?
Less is definitely more.
How important are tools and technology in your organization, Lucy, when you're reporting back on the impact of media? What do you use?
Technology is quite an important part of our business, but no, from a media perspective, we have the tools that I'm assuming that most most PR functions, most PR functions in the land have to kind of, from an earned, from an earned media perspective. We also do kind of pull on some of our own technology in certain areas and use AI in certain points to test sentiment, and things like that. But I kind of wanted to just come back to one of the points that Stella was making, actually, about the whole, first of all, consistency, but also everyone kind of getting involved. And I think it's really important to create a culture of measurement within a team. And actually, in this day and age, whoever you are on a team, whatever size, you need to know how to look at this data and to analyze data. And if that isn't just about, and again, less is more. So just being able to pinpoint some of those, those vital stats that are coming out. Everyone needs to do it. I think the days have gone of like, there is a measurement person and they will do it and they will tell you what the stats are. Because if you're running your own campaign and you've got your dashboards, you need to be able to know how to read them. But you need to educate and enthuse the team to be able to do it. And again, that comes back to the point of, it's not just being there to, to tick or cross a campaign if it's done well or not. It's actually being able to get actionable insights that then the team can use. If you kind of position it and you make them believe that it's worth their while because it will help them. This isn't here to judge you, it's here to help you. Then people are more will get on board, will learn, and then it becomes that culture of of your team, rather than that kind of additional layer on top.
Yeah.
But it's input, but having the technologies there, being able to pull the result, everything like that is brilliant. But what's just really important is you don't have this nice one page of stats and you go, whoa, look how great we were. It's the being able to layer on top that meaning and context, and actually how it's driving your next steps.
Yeah.
And because when you're going up to our senior leadership teams and the boards, they don't really get what, say, share a voice or whatever sentiment. They're like, yeah, great, but but you got to start putting the context around it. Well, actually, we've broken, we're above, it's 60% more than last quarter, and we are compared to competitors, it's this, and we're over a benchmark. So even just those basic things provide that bit of context, so that actually your figures aren't empty figures.
Yeah.
And they really do provide an insight into what you've been doing.
Yeah. That's actually quite a good segue, I think, into our next poll, which is, I'll launch it now. Hopefully, again, everybody can see this. It's, what is your biggest barrier to successfully reporting the value of your earned media efforts? Lack of tools, lack of training, lack of interest from C-suite or clients, lack of clear objectives, or cost. I think this speaks to, I think, Lucy, a culture of measurement, and that's something where AMEC, I think, is playing a huge role in raising the profile of measurements and evaluation across the industry. And I know I was talking to Richard Bagnall, Chair, and John O'Burt, the CEO, just yesterday, incidentally, for the attendees on the webinar. It's AMEC's 25th birthday next year, so expect to see some big initiatives coming out of AMEC. But I think one of the challenges is creating both a culture of measurement around the world, and it's very inconsistent around the world. And the second point is just around where people are on their measurement journey, because I think if we had more interactivity with everybody on the webinar today, it'd be really interesting to sort of maybe see where they are on their measurement journey. Are they just starting out, or are they actually very sophisticated? And I think the answer to that culture of measurement really is determined by where you are on that measurement journey. So we're getting a very interesting, and I'll end the poll in a moment, see if a couple more people might. We've got 64% voting on this, and it's very even, actually. It's the highest ranking currently is lack of clear objectives, lack of training. So we may want to talk a little bit about that and how you've approached that. Lack of interest from C-suite or clients. I think that actually should be a red flag to everybody on this call. Lack of tools is only 15% is actually is low, which is probably good. Let me end that poll and I can share it, so everybody hopefully can see that. So what that's shown us, it's relatively evenly split, and just by a short margin, lack of clear objectives. And I wonder, let's just pick up on that, from a both from your agency days, Stella, and also Lucy within IBM. How important is the setting of clear objectives been in your measurement journey, and how has it informed how you report on the impact of media relations?
It's really, really, really important. If you don't know what you're setting out to do, then there's no way in the world that you can measure it. And so what we have, and again, putting it into those two brackets, you have your kind of continuous measurements, and we have a couple of objectives for those, and each campaign maps into those, but actually there are different objectives for the different campaigns, and not a million different objectives. They're just you're working with different parts of the business. What you're setting out to do something ever so slightly different, but it's important not to get confused by it all. If you have a whole roster of objectives, then you'll forget them, and you'll just why are you doing this, to raise profile. We really want to kind of move on a bit from that, and then that will always be a reason, but there's got to be a bit more to it, more to it than that. So yeah, really clear objectives, and I think actually the objectives things probably links into the C-suite bit, because if you can't articulate why you're doing something, and provide, you probably can't position your results in the right way that actually will interest the C-suite and clients. So if they're not buying into the results, or they can't see that if they're good, bad, or whatever, then they're probably not going to be that interested. Yeah. So I think those two are quite closely linked.
Right. So less is more, is what you're saying. You've got to know what you're starting out to do, and less is more when it comes to objectives. And Stella, from your perspective, what is your experience tell you?
Yeah, so backing up Lucy's point, really, like even when you're set an objective and it seems quite clear, even if it's not a low level objective and it still has some kind of business impact involved, still go back to that point I made earlier of, I mean, maybe don't say it so rudely to a client of so what, but like be like a child. Like, why do you need, like Lucy's point, why do we need to raise the profile? Why? And then you get gradually, and even if your immediate client or objective setter, whether that's PR director, marketing director, or even a level above, even if they can't answer that question, eventually it will get back to a real business decision of, because X, Y, and Z. And then that's what we need to, as well as the initial objective, you have to consider that top, whoever, where this business decision came from within the campaign too, because it will change the kind of activity and also the way that you can measure that. I think that as well, just from going from agency side to now working within a business of coverage book, I understand exactly how we make money now, and it's very different to how I would have thought about that being on an agency side. So, things like lifetime value of a customer and things like, those kinds of terms, or exactly the formula that makes that up, I was not aware of that when I was in an agency. We might have understood roughly how a business made money, but it would have been quite sort of top level. But I feel like, as well as having access, I know it's difficult for PR to, have a seat with the C-suite or be able to have that senior level conversation. But my God, it's so important, because, even if you can't get to the very, very top, just go sideways, just try and speak to as many people as possible, because we actually, I remember when it was, the marketing agency, we took out an FD for lunch once, and people were like, why are you doing that? And it's just like, just tell us how you make money, because it was the best way of us then being able to have proof points of how we were going to do our work, but then also measure our work. So we had a stat for different people. The FD received a completely different report to the PR director, to the SEO director, and then to the CEO. The CEO had a different stat to the FD, to the PR director. And I think that's the way we need to be thinking now, because our work does impact all parts of the business, and you need different metrics and different ways of measuring for all.
Yeah, I think that's actually a top tip. I mean, I know, and I've heard it over the last few years, is we all want to talk the language at the C-suite, and I think that's an area where, through greater education, so lack of training came up actually as the second main reason, as a barrier to successfully reporting. I think training, not just around what's possible through measurements, but also training in the language of the C-suite. And I think that's a really smart idea, Stella, is taking the FD out to lunch. Not only is that the person who's going to sign off your invoice or your expenses, or sign off your budget internally, but understanding how you make money, and then working back to look at the ways in which the right media placement is going to help that individual be successful themselves. And that may be related in many cases where we're dealing with a public company, that's going to be related to investor confidence And obviously media has a huge role in investor confidence, broader market sentiment, working alongside obviously IR and other functions. So I think that's very smart. Speak the language of all of the stakeholders and be broad and don't be narrowed down to just PR. I'm aware of time, and I'd love, we've had a couple of questions come through. With the Q&A is open. Maybe we could just take a quick pause and see whether we get any other questions come through in the last sort of 7 or 8 minutes. We are stopping at the top of the hour. Are there any other questions from the attendees on the webinar that people would like to ask? Just see how that, see if anything comes back in. While we're waiting, I am interested just to go into this concept of branded search, Stella, you talked about, and I just want to revisit search, because search has such a huge impact on any business, and sometimes it is a proxy for awareness. So maybe just unpack that a little bit for us. How do you use it, and where do you see it going? What's next?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and keep this short, because obviously search and PR, we could talk all week about that. But the reason why I'm exploring it at the moment, what's topical right now, and I've been doing some work with Stephen Waddington on this right now, is trying to understand how people are feeling, and then how our work then affects that. So often we have media relations, which we can measure, and then we might then look into insights through social media, conversations, sentiment, things like that. So when people are talking on social media, we can track that. We're quite comfortable with that as PR professionals now. We have all sorts of different types of tracking technology. We're looking at sentiment, and we can pull that in. But what we're starting to see is that social media has a bit, that if when you have people have their best life on Instagram, that people consider before they post on social media. Now, what we're seeing is search. When people go to Google, when you pull out your phone, you put in a question, whether it's about COVID, whether it's about the election, whether it's about what time shops close, whatever it is, you can look at search data localized, and you can look at the types of questions and trends in questions day to day, and it gives you so much insight to how people are feeling. In fact, probably you can gain more sort of insight through what people search for than actually speaking to them. So if you think about sort of market research, or you have a panel, and it can be quite biased sometimes. If you set out some questions to people and try and get their feeling on something, it does tend to be quite biased. And that's what I'm sort of looking at the moment, and like how we can use that kind of data in PR. And so, yeah, we Answer the Public is it pulls in all of the questions from Google, and you can look at it in different ways. But it's often been a tool that's used at the insight phase, but actually it's so interesting at this measurement. Well, measurement and insight is similar kind of thing, but often that tool is used for like content creation and that kind of thing. But yeah, looking at how you can use that to track public feeling, and then depending on what kind of questions are people putting in, there's all sorts of like triggers for crisis and reputation management that are coming up. It's really, really interesting. So yeah, I'm going to release some more stuff and writing about it at the moment, but it's a really interesting thing right now.
There's the thing. Make sure everybody follows or looks up Stella on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and watch out for some more great thought leadership. And actually, anonymous attendee, thank you, anonymous, highly recommends Everybody Lies by Seth Stevens Davidowitz on this note. So I'm sure Stella knows that. We're coming to the top of the hour. Griffin, you asked a question about what sort of programs and tools do we primarily use for media monitoring, what works, what doesn't. That's a very, it's an interesting question, not one I think on this panel we should address. I think it was a little bit unfair on some of the vendors.
Endorsement.
No endorsements, and I wasn't going to ask Lucy because I noticed how she dodged that question when I put it to her earlier. But if
I'm happy to say it.
If you want to just maybe contact me separately, I'll certainly give you a couple of opinions. But I'm aware that we're coming to the top of the hour, so what I would love to do is just ask Lucy and Stella for their three, I guess the three top tips, the three takeaways that you all might have from this session. So maybe Lucy, do you want to go first with your top tips?
Oh, yeah. I prepared the first bit and I haven't prepared this bit. So I think, looking through the conversation today, I think I'm going to take an assumption everyone's got the objectives bit and everyone's aware of that. The top things for me are about being able to provide context around your figures, tailoring it to the audience that you're delivering them to, as the one. And as secondly is kind of creating that culture of measurement and ensuring all of your team are able to kind of dig into and read the figures that will actually help them, and also being changing your view of measurement from just being the thing that is at the end, and actually seeing how you can use the results to first of all form your campaigns and then also monitor them throughout. Right. So it really becomes ingrained into the workings of the team rather than the thing you do at the end to prove success.
Right, thank you. Stella.
Number one, be realistic. I think I mentioned earlier on about it's really good to be consistent with metrics, and if those metrics need to be just to be able to see any kind of correlation or increases, decreases over the year, if they need to be the traffic that a website might gain in a month, that's fine, but be completely realistic that they are not the people who saw your brand mention or read the article. So whatever way you want to look at that, whether you want to try and drill down into article level metrics, do that if you can. But if not, if you need to use those bigger ones, don't then try and claim that as, the reach of the mention. So be realistic with whatever metrics you go with. Number two, just always keep asking yourself, so what? And that can really help with those different, Lucy was talking about the different sort of levels and the C-suite, like, from your immediate client to the level above those guys, and then to the FD or to whoever else, just whatever metrics you're using, just go, so what? So, so what for this, we had this kind of reach. And then what did they do? And then the so what, it does really help. And I think it's actually a really good training tool for teams as well when you're trying to develop their measurement skills too. We had it as a, when we had reports and dashboards for clients, which actually made it as a note for the team to fill in. And somebody, one of the consultants, left it in by mistake when they sent it over to the client. And the client came back and went, I love this, so what? So actually we kept it in the end, but it really helped. Number three, really think about the end user or the target audience. It seems like such an obvious point, but like, we talk about it, but then we still go to media first. And so, just honestly, like with the strategy and the thinking about how you're going to communicate to that audience and then how to measure it as well with the so what's, it's just got to be that end user, that customer, that audience, and don't focus so much on media, which we always do in our industry.
Right. Great, thank you very much. Well, we're at the top of the hour. So first of all, huge thank you to Stella and Lucy for taking the time out to share your experience. And thank you very much to everybody who has attended the webinar. I do want to give just one more push to AMEC. It is Measurement Month. If you go to amecorg.com, there is a little window, a little banner, and you can see that there are many different events happening around the world with some of the world's leading experts talking about many different parts of the measurement journey. I'd encourage you to go there. I would also encourage you that if you're not a member of AMEC, please do sign up. It's actually very affordable, and the content, the IP, the knowledge, incredible. End of commercial break. Thank you all so very much for joining. Really appreciate taking an hour of your day wherever you are in the world. Stay safe, and thank you very much.
Thank you.